The black cars arrived without warning. 3 of them. Sleek, electric, soundless, the kind of vehicles that don't belong on this side of Seattle. They pulled up along the curb outside the King County Courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning, and the people waiting on the steps looked up the way people do when something feels wrong without yet knowing why. Amara did not look up. She was standing slightly apart from the crowd, the way she always stood, not hiding exactly but not expecting to be seen either. She held a manila envelope against her chest with both hands, the way a person holds something they are afraid to lose. Inside it were documents. Property notices. Letters from a law firm she had never heard of before 6 months ago. Words she had read so many times she no longer needed to open the envelope to remember them. The building at 1147 Delridge Way Southwest is subject to acquisition proceedings. She was 63 years old. Her back ached in the cold. She had taken 2 buses to get here. The car doors opened. 3 men stepped out. They were Korean, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, the kind of men who carry themselves as though the ground firms up slightly wherever they walk. The eldest moved first, calm, unhurried, scanning the courthouse steps with steady eyes. The other 2 flanked him instinctively, the way brothers do, not from instruction but from 25 years of habit. The crowd noticed them. Of course it did. People pulled out phones. Someone whispered. A courthouse security guard shifted his weight. Miho saw her first. He stopped walking. For a moment, he just stood there on the courthouse steps, and the world kept moving around him. Pigeons, briefcases, the distant horn of a ferry, and he stood absolutely still, staring at a small elderly woman in a beige coat who was clutching a manila envelope and looking at the ground. Jehun noticed his brother had stopped. He followed his gaze. Then Doyen. They crossed the steps slowly. The crowd parted, not because anyone asked it to, but because something in the way these 3 men moved made room feel necessary. Amara heard footsteps and looked up. She saw 3 strangers in expensive suits walking toward her, and her first instinct, the instinct of a woman who had lived 63 years in the margins of other people's stories, was to check whether she was in someone's way. She stepped aside. They followed her. She looked confused. Miho stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that holds an entire history, and then, without a word, without ceremony, without anything except the quiet certainty of a man who has been waiting 25 years to do exactly this, he lowered himself to one knee. Jehun knelt beside him. Doyeon knelt beside Jehun. The courthouse steps went silent. Phones rose. People stared. The security guard forgot what he was about to do. An elderly woman in a beige coat stood before 3 powerful men on their knees, and she looked not triumphant, not moved. She looked genuinely confused, her brow creased, her mouth slightly open, her hands tightening on her envelope. Yama, Miho said quietly. The Korean word for mother. Amara blinked. She looked at his face, really looked at it, the way she hadn't allowed herself to look at anything fragile in a very long time, and something shifted behind her eyes. Around them, strangers whispered their theories. A politician? A debt? Some kind of publicity stunt? Nobody standing on those courthouse steps understood what they were witnessing. But to understand it, you would have to go back. You would have to go back 25 years, to a different kind of morning entirely, a rainy night and a broken bus shelter and 3 boys who had nothing left, and a woman who had very little herself, but gave it anyway. Before the courthouse steps, before the kneeling, before any of it, there was a small apartment on Beacon Hill, and inside it, there was warmth. Not the warmth of money. The Kims didn't have much of that. Their father worked double shifts at a dry cleaning shop on Rainier Avenue, coming home smelling of steam and solvent, his hands rough from the machines. Their apartment had water-stained ceilings and a radiator that clanked through the winter nights like something alive and disagreeable. But their mother made it a home. She had a way of filling rooms. Her laugh arrived before she did. She cooked with the radio on, singing slightly off-key, and the boys never told her, not because they were kind, but because they genuinely didn't notice. To them, her voice was simply part of the air. Miho, the eldest, absorbed everything. Even at 8 years old, he was already watching, the bills on the counter, the look on his father's face when he thought no one was paying attention. He took pride in small responsibilities, setting the table, walking Jehun to school. Jehun asked questions about everything. Why does steam rise? Why do people dream? He filled notebooks with observations in his careful, cramped handwriting and kept them stacked under his bed like small archives of a mind that couldn't stop noticing the world. Doyeon was 5, and the world was still largely magical to him. He drew on whatever surface held still long enough: margins of newspapers, the back of grocery receipts, the inside of his own arm. His mother never scolded him for it. She framed one of his drawings, a lopsided house with smoke coming from the chimney, and hung it on the wall above the kitchen table. It stayed there a long time after she was gone. She died on a Thursday in February. An aneurysm, the doctors said, sudden, painless, which was supposed to be a comfort, and wasn't. Their father became a man standing in an empty room, turning in slow circles, not knowing which wall to face. He tried. He truly tried. But grief has a way of making the simplest things, dinner, bedtime, a hug, feel impossibly heavy. 2 years later, he brought someone home. The boys sat together on the couch and tried, cautiously, to hope. She arrived with a suitcase and a careful smile. Her name was Sora. She was composed, well-dressed, and in those first weeks she said all the right things, complimenting Miho's maturity, asking Jehun about his notebooks, crouching down to Doyeon's level, and admiring a drawing he'd made. Their father watched these small moments with something close to relief. He wanted so badly for them to work that he allowed himself to believe they already had. The boys were more cautious. Children always are. By the 3rd month, the careful smile had stopped arriving. It happened in increments, the way cold enters a room, not all at once but through the slow failure of warmth. First it was tone. A sharpness when they left shoes by the door. An impatience at dinner that hadn't been there before. Small corrections delivered, with just enough edge to sting. Then the corrections became rules. Then the rules became punishments. The boys were assigned chores before school and after: floors, dishes, laundry, scrubbing the bathroom tiles on their knees while Sora watched from the doorway with her arms crossed. If the work was imperfect, it was done again. Meals grew smaller, then scarcer. There were evenings when the boys shared what little was on their plates between them and said nothing about it, because saying something felt more dangerous than hunger. "You're not my children." She said it once directly to Miho. After that, she didn't need to say it again. It lived in the house like a smell. Their father left before dawn and returned exhausted. On the nights he noticed a bruised silence at the dinner table, Sora would touch his arm and say the boys had been difficult today, and he would nod with the defeated trust of a man too tired to look closely. Miho watched his father not looking and said nothing. Protecting his brothers meant keeping the peace. Disturbing the peace cost too much. Jehun stopped asking questions. He pressed himself small and moved through rooms like a held breath. Doyeon, who had once drawn on every surface he could find, stopped drawing entirely. He was 7 years old and had already learned the particular skill of making himself invisible. The lopsided house with the chimney smoke still hung above the kitchen table. No one looked at it anymore. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in October. Miho answered the phone because he always answered the phone. He was 11 years old. He listened to the voice on the other end, calm, clinical, the particular gentleness of someone trained to deliver the undeliverable, and he stood very still in the kitchen while the world rearranged itself permanently around him. Their father had been struck by a delivery truck on his way to work. He had not survived. Miho hung up the phone and sat on the kitchen floor, not because his legs gave out, simply because standing seemed suddenly pointless. He sat there until Jehun found him, and then Jehun sat down beside him without asking why, and they stayed that way until Doyeon wandered in and climbed into Miho's lap without a word, the way small children find the center of a storm and press themselves into it. They cried until they couldn't, and then they were just 3 boys, sitting on a kitchen floor in the quiet. Whatever protection their father's presence had offered, even his diminished, exhausted, frequently absent protection, they understood now that it had been real, because its absence arrived like a physical thing. Sora, did not grieve. Or if she did, grief in her took the shape of fury. Within a week, the house became somewhere else entirely. The rules dissolved into something rawer and less structured, not discipline anymore, but punishment without cause. She moved through rooms in a state of barely contained rage, and the boys learned to track her moods the way sailors track weather, not to prepare, but simply to know what was coming. Your father left me with nothing. You are nothing. You were always nothing. The night she finally broke came 3 weeks after the funeral. What started as a collision over a broken dish, Doyeon's hands were small, things slipped, escalated into something that shook the walls. When it was over, the front door was open and Sora was standing in it, and she told them to get out with a steadiness that was worse than screaming. Miho took his brother's hands. They walked out with what they were wearing. The door closed behind them. The city offered no particular welcome, just cold air, distant sirens, and the indifferent dark of a Seattle night stretching out in every direction. They had nowhere to go, so they walked. The city did not notice them. That was the first lesson. They had imagined, in the vague, desperate way children imagine things, that someone would stop. A neighbor, a teacher, someone who had known their father, or their mother, or simply recognized them as children who did not belong on the street. But Seattle moved around them the way water moves around stones, finding the path of least resistance, and 3 Korean boys huddled in a doorway on Rainier Avenue were very easy to flow past. They slept where the wind didn't reach. The back corner of a parking garage on Columbian Way where the attendant worked nights and left a section unmonitored. A bus shelter on Beacon Hill with a cracked roof that was better than nothing until it wasn't. Food came in the spaces between people's attention. A bakery that left unsold bread by the dumpster after closing. A convenience store where the owner sometimes looked away. Miho never let his brothers go hungry if he could absorb the hunger himself, and he was very good at not showing what he was absorbing. He was 11 years old and already ancient in the ways that mattered. Jaehoon watched everything, the patrol routes, the shelter schedules, which streets were safe at which hours. He didn't speak much. He had decided, with the quiet logic of a 9-year-old who had learned that the wrong words at the wrong moment cost too much, that observation was more useful than expression. He kept a mental ledger of every kindness and every threat. Doyeon stopped eating properly and started sleeping too much. He was 7, and the magic that had once animated the world, the drawings, the questions, the lopsided houses with chimney smoke, had gone somewhere unreachable. At night, he pressed himself against Miho's side and Miho let him, every time, without comment. One night Miho made them both promise. No matter what happens, we don't leave each other. They promised. The way children promise things, completely, without reservation, not yet knowing how much it would cost to keep. The night it all changed was a Thursday in November. Rain came sideways off the Sound. The broken bus shelter on Delridge offered a partial roof and nothing else. The 3 of them huddled beneath it, shaking. A woman walked past, then stopped. Amara was tired in the specific way of someone who has been tired for years and simply stopped remarking on it. She worked the night cleaning shift at a middle school on Delridge, 6 hours of corridors and classrooms, the industrial hum of a vacuum, the smell of disinfectant settling into her coat. She was 41 years old, had emigrated from Nigeria 11 years earlier, and lived alone in a studio apartment 8 blocks away. Her income covered rent, groceries, and very little else. She had learned not to think too far ahead. She almost didn't see them. She was walking with her head down against the rain when something made her look up, not a sound exactly, more an instinct, the particular sensitivity of a woman who had known what it felt like to be invisible in a city that wasn't hers. 3 shapes beneath the broken shelter. Small shapes. She stopped. They flinched when she approached, all 3 of them drawing inward the way children do when adults have reliably meant danger. She recognized the reflex immediately and slowed, keeping distance, crouching slightly, so she wasn't looming. She asked if they were all right. Nobody answered. Doyeon pressed closer to Miho. Jaehoon watched her hands. She didn't push. She reached into her bag and set a wrapped sandwich on the bench between them, her own dinner, brought from home, and stepped back. Doyeon ate it in 4 bites. Something passed across Miho's face. Not gratitude yet. Something before gratitude. The complicated anguish of a child who needed help and had learned to be afraid of needing it. Amara stood in the rain and made a decision she would never fully be able to explain. Not a calculated decision. Not a heroic one. Simply the recognition that she could not leave and still be herself.
Come.
Just for tonight. Her apartment was one room. A hot plate, a narrow bed, a second-hand sofa with a pattern worn to nothing. She spread every blanket she owned across the floor and heated rice on the stove and didn't ask them any questions that night because questions could wait and warmth could not. The boys fell asleep within the hour. Amara sat in the single chair by the window and listened to them breathe and did not sleep at all. The first year was the hardest and also somehow the best. Hard because nothing was easy. The apartment was too small for 4 people and Amara's salary was built for 1. She picked up additional shifts, weekend office cleaning, occasional laundry work for a hotel 3 blocks over, and still there were weeks when the math simply didn't work and she solved the problem by eating less herself and hoping the boys didn't notice. They noticed. Miho always noticed. School was its own wilderness. The boys' English was functional but fractured, and American classrooms had social architectures that took time to decode. There were difficult days. Jehun came home silent in a particular way once, and Amara sat beside him and didn't ask questions, just stayed close until the silence changed texture. Then she made tea and said, quietly, "They cannot take from you what you build inside your own mind." Jehun wrote it in a notebook. The habit had returned, slowly, like a plant finding light again. Amara had 3 principles she returned to so consistently they became the furniture of the apartment, present in every room, impossible to avoid. Education protects your future. Skills create your opportunity. Integrity builds the trust that holds everything else together. She didn't deliver these as lectures. They arrived embedded in ordinary moments, helping with homework at the kitchen table, or walking to the library on Saturday mornings, the 4 of them in a row on the pavement. She made library cards feel like something worth having. Gradually, the boys began to find themselves. Miho discovered electronics through a broken radio he'd pulled from a neighbor's recycling. He took it apart to understand it, then put it back together. Then, he found something else broken. He developed an absorption around circuitry and systems that Amara recognized immediately as a form of intelligence and quietly fed cheap components, secondhand textbooks, a soldering kit she found at a garage sale for $3. Jehun discovered coding through a school computer. The logic of it suited his mind precisely, ordered, consequential, honest in the way that things either worked or they didn't. Doyeon drew again. First tentatively, then prolifically. Design found him the way water finds its level, inevitably, without forcing. 3 boys had arrived at her door with nothing. They were becoming, slowly and stubbornly, themselves. They left the way they had arrived, one difficult moment at a time. Miho received his scholarship offer on a Tuesday in March. A full engineering program at the University of Washington followed 2 years later by a position at a firm in San Jose that had noticed his thesis, work on embedded systems. He read the offer letter at the kitchen table while Amara made tea and didn't say anything, which was how she expressed things that mattered most. Jehun's path came through a coding competition his community college instructor had quietly entered him into without telling him. He placed first. The calls that followed were not entirely surprising. He had built things at night for years, small programs, quiet solutions, but the speed of it startled everyone, including Jehun. Doyeon was accepted into a design program in New York. His portfolio, assembled across years of sketchbooks and digital work, had caught the attention of a faculty member who described his instincts as unusually mature. Amara framed the acceptance letter and hung it beside the lopsided house drawing that had survived every move, every year, still occupying its place on whatever wall she called home. The last meal together happened on a Sunday. Amara cooked everything they had ever loved, jollof rice alongside the doenjang jjigae she had learned to make adequately over 15 years of trying, and the 4 of them sat in the apartment that had once held all of them and was about to hold only one. They ate slowly, The way people eat when they know the meal is also a closing. Miho spoke first the way he always had. He told her they would come back, that this wasn't the end of anything. His voice held steady for most of it. Amara looked at him across the small table and said, with complete sincerity, that he owed her nothing, that watching them become who they were had already repaid anything she had ever given. "You owe the world now," she said.
Not me.
They left one by one across that spring, each departure quieter than the last, as though the apartment absorbed the sound. Then it was just Amara again. The city outside her window, the old drawing on the wall, the particular silence of a home that had once held more than it does now, and still remembers. The courthouse steps, where we began. Now you know what the crowd didn't. They had been watching a scene they couldn't decode. 3 men in expensive suits, on their knees, before a small elderly woman clutching a manila envelope like it was the only solid thing in the world. People had their theories.
A debt.
A publicity stunt. Something political. They filmed it on their phones and whispered their explanations to each other, and every explanation missed entirely. What they were witnessing was 25 years of consequence arriving all at once. Miho spoke first, still on one knee, his voice steady in the way of a man who has prepared for a moment and discovered, upon reaching it, that preparation only carries you so far. He told the crowd that this woman had found them on the street, that she had worked night shifts cleaning classrooms and had almost nothing and had given what she had anyway, that she had fed them and sheltered them and sat in a chair by the window all night to make sure they were safe, and had never once asked for anything in return or treated her own sacrifice as remarkable. He said that every degree, every company, every good thing the 3 of them had built, the engineering firm, the software company, the design studio, had its foundation not in talent or ambition or luck, but in a studio apartment on Delridge, and a woman who had looked at 3 frightened homeless boys and seen, simply, children who needed help. His voice held steady for most of it. Amara stood with her envelope and said nothing. Her expression was not the expression of someone receiving a great gift. It was the expression of someone trying to locate themselves inside a moment too large to immediately inhabit. Jahun rose and stepped forward. He held a document folder, not the kind carried by the lawyers who had been sending Amara letters for 6 months, but thicker, more deliberate. He opened it and walked her through it quietly, almost gently, the way he had always explained things, with patience, with care, with the deep attention of a man who understood that clarity was its own form of kindness. The brothers had purchased her building. They had done it 6 weeks earlier, through a holding company, without telling her. The 3 surrounding properties, too. The vacant lot on the corner that developers had been negotiating over for 2 years. Every letter from every law firm threatening her home was now legally void. She would never receive another one. Amara looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she looked at Jahun. He nodded once, and something in her face shifted, not collapsed, but opened, the way a room opens when a window is finally raised after a long winter. Then Doyen stepped forward with a second set of documents. Architectural drawings, rendered in the clean, precise lines of someone who had been imagining this building for years. Wide windows. Open corridors. Spaces designed to feel warm rather than institutional, the deliberate opposite of every cold place 3 boys had once been forced to survive. The Amara Learning Center. Built on the corner of the street where she had found them. Designed entirely by Doyen. Funded by all 3 brothers without reservation or condition. A permanent facility for homeless and immigrant children, stable housing, full education support, technology training, creative programs, mentorship from people who understood what it meant to have nothing and find a way through. They had also, in the months prior, quietly engaged attorneys to reopen the legal record of what had been done to them as children. The cruelty that had gone unwitnessed and unpunished for 25 years was witnessed now. Accountability, long deferred, arrived with the particular weight of things that have waited too long. The crowd on the courthouse steps had gone completely silent. Amara stood at the center of it all, a small woman in a beige coat, holding drawings of a building that bore her name, surrounded by 3 men who had once been 3 boys she found shaking in the rain. She touched Miho's face with one hand the way she had when he was 11 years old and learning, slowly, to trust again. He closed his eyes. On the day they unveiled the building, 3 months later, a bronze plaque was mounted beside the entrance. Doyun had designed it himself, simple, unhurried, the letters clean and permanent. One act of kindness can change the future of generations. Beneath it, a single name, Amara. She stood before it on the morning of the opening and rested her hand against it briefly, the metal cool under her palm, and said nothing for a long moment. Those who knew her understood that this was how she expressed the things that mattered most.